Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun channel. Last week there was an article that came out, actually it was everywhere. This one specifically, WAAF9, Approval ADHD device sends electrical pulse to child's brain. And it says a medical device to treat childhood ADHD has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. And it says it's the first medical device of its kind, and it's called the MONARCH External Trigeminal Nerve Stimulation System, which was given the okay by the FDA on Friday. And I found it curious, of course. The MONARCH External Trigeminal Nerve Stimulation. And we'll get into more specifics in a second, but it says here it was designed for children ages 7 to 12 who are not currently on medication for the disorder. So to start off, I just kind of wanted to look over ADHD as a thing. And obviously there's a lot of opinions, but according to the science, it's a legit thing. And in this particular article, the ADHD Controversy by ScienceBasedMedicine.org, written by Stephen Novella, it addresses the criticisms that were thrown by Jerome Kagan, who is a psychologist, I believe. And they make some decent points about why it should be rejected, or his criticism anyway. But here is a quote from Kagan criticizing some of this stuff. Quote, "Let's go back 50 years. We have a 7-year-old child who is bored in school and disrupts classes. Back then, he was called lazy. Today, he is said to suffer from ADHD. That's why the numbers have soared." And I know this sentiment has been around the internet, like especially recently, I've seen it as a way of thinking in terms of ADHD. And I think there's some truth to this, but they try to kind of poo-poo it. And the article goes on to respond, being generous, he may be implying only that doctors are overdiagnosing ADHD and not following their own diagnostic criteria. This is a real issue, which they're admitting that that is a real issue, which is part of the problem here if they're going to be sending out devices, right? This is a real issue, but here is a far more nuanced discussion from an actual clinician. So, they're boasting their own quotes here. ADHD is real, it's not made up, but it exists on a continuum. There's no marker or white line that says you're a definite or highly likely group. There's almost unanimous agreement that 5 or 6% clearly have enough of these symptoms for an ADHD diagnosis. Then there's the next group, where the diagnosis is more of a judgment call, and for these kids, behavioral therapy might work. And then there's a third group on the borderline. There are the ones we're worried about being pushed into an inaccurate diagnosis. So there you go. They're admitting, even though the criticism they're trying to tear down, they're admitting that there is a problem here in terms of diagnosing, and while there is a criteria to follow, it's not an exact science. So just keep that in mind as a primer here for what they're treating with this ADHD. But let's get specific with the name of this thing. It's called the MONARCH External Trigeminal Nerve Stimulation System. And of course, if you look at Project MONARCH, for those of you who don't know, generally speaking, in the lingo or vernacular of the alternative worldview to what is officially out there, this is a summary on strangerdimensions.com. It was published in 2013. I'm just going to read it because it's sort of a good summary on the idea of Project MONARCH. As the story goes, Project MONARCH was part of a covert CIA operation known as MKUltra, which began in 1953. It would also later be attributed to the Illuminati and is allegedly still in use today. Under Project MONARCH, victims, usually young children, are subjected to intense trauma inflicted to the point at which their minds disassociate from the experience. This causes a form of multiple personality disorder, allowing the programmer or handler to mold these disassociated minds into new controllable personalities. From there, triggers or alters are put in place with popular media and other sources that trigger and cause the mind-controlled slaves to perform whatever actions they have been programmed to do. There are also various stages or types of programming, each tuned to specific types of individuals and serving different purposes. Alpha programming, for example, leads to increased memory ability and greater physical strength. while delta programming exists to remove fear and ensure that orders are followed until the very last breath. What's the end goal of all of this? Control, of course. And they get into the symbolism of the butterfly here. Project Monarch is so named because of the specific traits of the monarch butterfly. The traumatization, typically electroshock therapy, causes a feeling of lightheadedness or fluttering like a butterfly. But even beyond that, there is a metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly, as well as the aforementioned theorized genetic memory or instinct, which, just to interject, the article starts off with talking about migratory patterns of butterflies in general and how even though it takes several generations for that migration to happen, the butterflies know where to go. So there's this genetic memory concept passed down through bloodlines that bring the monarchs back to the same habitat year after year. The butterfly has therefore become the symbol of this covert mind control operation. The notion or the phrase monarch has never been officially verified by any government documents or anything that has been released due to FISA requests. So it says here, Kathy O'Brien, conspiracy theorist. She's an author, speaker who claims to be a victim of government mind control, a program called Project Monarch, which she alleges was part of the CIA's Project MKUltra. There's also a book called Monarch, the New Phoenix Program, and in this book it was written by Marshall Thomas, and it says here in the description, MKUltra took place at over 80 institutions, and the current illegal program that I call Monarch, the real name is unknown, is equally complex. So this author calls this covert program that's happening now, he calls it Monarch. So this is just alternative researchers looking at the word here, Monarch, or, testimony from people who have said to have experienced it. So this is why, when we look at this article and the name of this object is Monarch, you tend to at least be curious about what might be really going on. And if you go to their website here, this is the monarch-etns.com by Neurosigma, which is the company that was approved here by the European Union. It says down here, the Monarch external trigeminal nerve stimulation system treats ADHD non-invasively with signals delivered to the brain via a trigeminal nerve on the forehead. Oy, oy, oy. The Monarch ETNS system received CE mark approval and is now available in the European Union. CE marking, the letters CE appear on many products traded on the extended single market in the European Economic Area, the EEA. So it's sort of a mark of the beast system for the EU. And it's got all kinds of stuff here. The ETNS system was developed and tested by doctors at the University of California, UCLA. And I'll mention UCLA again in a minute here. But of course, if you think about it, a monarch can simply be, like royalty. But it's clear that based on the logo right up here of this device, that the butterfly is in effect. And, there have been plenty of videos and blogs and stuff who have documented the various uses of the butterfly in imagery across Hollywood as this sort of symbolic gesture towards the MKUltra project. And I believe it, again, it's self-evident when you look at how much it's used in certain things, in popular media and culture and these celebrities and stuff that for some reason always pose with butterflies, and even just culturally making it something that is desired for young people to display in tattoos and things of that nature. And the connection to Hollywood and UCLA, as mentioned, the place where the device was developed, as well as this mind control thing all coming together, is Norman Lear. If you don't know about Norman Lear, he is a well-known TV producer, and in this UCLA newsroom it says Norman Lear's work is never done. At UCLA Blueprint event, the iconic TV producer reflects on his career and shares his thoughts on modern America. This was published on January 18th of 2018. But, he's the guy behind All in the Family, Good Times, The Jeffersons, Maude. These are very politically charged TV shows that, that brought race division into the forefront in terms of discussion. He's also the founder of a liberal political organization called People for the American Way. And he, takes money and donations to fight climate change and stuff. So there you go. He's loyal to that side of the aisle, so to speak, but that's not really the point here. The point really is that if you know about Norman Lear and the ways in which he helps stories in Hollywood develop, or not him himself necessarily, but his organization, they've openly admitted that intelligence agencies through the Norman Lear Foundation help shape the way they are perceived in television shows like CSI and others, hundreds of them. And so there's a massive connection to all of this, proximity, UCLA, also Hollywood, and the butterfly. I don't think it's a coincidence, just my opinion. And it doesn't just come from, oh, I'm just a crazy thinking guy. No, the technocrats have published this material back, throughout the centuries, or throughout the decades anyway, but certainly most recently notable, Zbigniew Brzezinski, in his document Between Two Ages, in a section titled Social Explosion Implosion, he wrote, quote, speaking of a future at most only decades away, this was written in 1976, so he may be talking about our time now, an experimenter in intelligence control asserted, quote, I foresee the time when we shall have the means and therefore inevitably the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all people through environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain, end quote. And of course, he's quoting this experimenter in intelligence control, whoever that is that Big Z was hanging out with back then. He goes on to state, quote, instead of accepting himself as a spontaneous given man in the most advanced societies, may become more concerned with conscious self-analysis according to external explicit criteria. What is my IQ? What are my aptitudes, personality traits, capabilities, attractions, and negative features? The internal man spontaneously accepts his own spontaneity will more and more be challenged by the external man, consciously seeking his self-conscious image, and the transition from one to the other may not be easy. It will also give rise to difficult problems in determining the legitimate scope of social control, the possibility of extensive chemical mind control, the danger of loss of individuality inherent in extensive transplantation, the feasibility of manipulating the genetic structure will call for the social definition of common criteria of use and restraint. And that really summarizes how a device that the FDA just approved could be used for massive, massive control and evil and things that are bad. This is the FDA website here. Food permit marketing of first medical devices for treatment of ADHD. It goes over the same types of things here, a little more detail. It's intended to be used in the home under the supervision of a caregiver. The cell phone-sized device generates a low-level electrical pulse and connects via a wire to a small patch that adheres to a patient's forehead just above the eyebrows, as if we don't know where the forehead is, and should feel like a tingling sensation on the skin. The system delivers the low-level electrical stimulation to the branches of the trigeminal, or I hope I've been saying that right, it might be trigeminal nerve, which sends therapeutic signals to the parts of the brain thought to be involved in ADHD. Thought to be involved in ADHD. They don't even know for sure, I guess. While the exact mechanism of the ETNS is not yet known, neuroimaging studies have shown that ETNS increases activity in the brain regions that are known to be important in regulating attention, emotion, and behavior. So outright saying that these low-level electrical stimulations into the forehead is going to change and regulate attention, emotion, and behavior. Now, of course, these things come with side effects. The most common side effects observed with ETNS use are drowsiness, an increase in appetite, trouble sleeping, teeth clenching, headache, and fatigue. No serious adverse events were associated with use of the device. And it goes on that, people with implantable pacemakers or with active implantable neurostimulators should not use it. People with insulin pumps shouldn't use it. And here's the other thing. Should not be used in the presence of radio frequency energy such as magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, because it has not been tested in an MRI machine or cell phones, because the phone's low levels of electromagnetic energy may interrupt the therapy. The FDA reviewed the MONARCH ETNS system through the de novo pre-market review pathway, a regulatory pathway for low to moderate risk devices of a new type. This action creates a new regulatory classification. So they had to create a new regulatory class just to allow this device to come through, this, low level, moderate risk device of a new type. And also, again, warnings to not be used around MRIs or other radio frequency energy like cell phones. Why is that? Is it easily something that can be manipulated, damaged from this stuff, or even hijacked? Who knows? But this is what is public. This is not anything that is necessarily conspiracy theory or anything like that. This is just public stuff that's going on. And again, self-evident, all the markers of the types of things and esoteric belief systems that have been part of the, secret cabal or whatever you want to call it, who have been doing these experiments for decades. The idea of electrically stimulating your brain and changing your emotional states is nothing new. And in fact, there is a market for these types of products. This is the brain stimulator, Stimulate Your Life. And I thought it was just kind of funny here on this website, the latest TDCS news and highlights. Transcranial direct current stimulation is currently sweeping the nation, nay, world, as more and more people learn of the incredible benefits TDCS can offer. In fact, we found that new articles on the subject are published almost on a daily basis. And so, again, this stuff is out there. This one here, one of the most recent articles, April 25th, 2019, Personalized Healthcare with High-Performance Computing in the Cloud. One great example of this is an award-winning Uber Cloud experiment conducted to evaluate the efficacy of transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS, a non-invasive treatment for schizophrenia using multiple electric fields placed on the scalp. The procedure precisely activates selected regions deep in the brain that cause schizophrenia. The technology and techniques used in these virtual human brain simulations could be used to develop safer, more cost-effective treatments for other neuropsychiatric disorders such as depression, Parkinson's disease, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Furthermore, cloud-based computational simulations have diverse potential applications for treating many other medical conditions and for addressing complex medical challenges. So here we have clear evidence that they're going to use cloud-based computing simulations in connection with these types of brain electrode devices, and the product here by MONARCH ETNS is one of those things made for children between the ages of 7 and older, which again I find fascinating based on the idea that the MKUltra experiments were conducted on children sometimes as young as 7, maybe even younger sometimes actually. The kinds of experiments that were done on humans between MKUltra and places like, or people and folks like Alfred Kinsey is pretty horrific. And it goes, no wonder we live in a culture and society now where people think it's okay to dash the fetus in the womb, so to speak. So as these things continue to develop and get pushed out there, the world is going to continually divide in terms of people who are aware of what's going on and those who are not. And even within that, really the people who are aware, my argument is that you can't ultimately have or find any hope in where this is all headed without grounding your reality, this worldview, in the truth of the gospel in Christ Jesus, dying for our sins, God raising him from the dead to prove that what he was saying is true and that he is the Lord of Lords. So 2 Corinthians 3:16 says, "But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed," or the veil is taken away. Basically, if you repent and you turn to the Lord, the veil shall be taken away, it shall be removed. And the context of this is talking about Moses coming down. The reference to Moses wearing a veil on his head has to do with the Face Like the Sun channel, the name of it, partly where I got the concept of Face Like the Sun as a name for the channel, looking at the times when people's faces were glowing. Moses was one of those examples when he came down from the mountain. That's why they had to put a veil on his head. Also in the sense that people's minds were hardened and they were unable to see the truth. Until they turn to the Lord, the veil cannot be lifted. And so, again, to me, all of these topics and looking at all of these items, it's not just exposing it. It's like, look, the truth and the reality is that there is this freedom from it at the fundamental level, but it involves something that is sort of been controlled into a obsolete thing, and that is the gospel message of Jesus Christ in its purest form. There's so many different doctrines and so many different things that go on top of it that, again, anybody can fall into different types of denominations or different types of groups or some kind of doctrine, rapture doctrine, whatever it is. Everybody falls into these different categories, but in reality, the foundational point is Christ crucified, risen from the dead, and turning to the Lord and repenting your own sins, recognizing who you are in this process of this entire worldview. That's when the truth resonates and everything starts to make sense. At least it was for me. 2 Corinthians 4:4. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers. I mean, talk about truth, right? The God of this world, who is Satan, having control or blinding the minds of the unbelievers. If you're an unbeliever, you're very susceptible to Satan's lies. And that's just the reality of it. And that's why we can have companies like MONARCH ETNS system by NeuroSigma be right out in the open, a mind control device for children, basically, using ADHD as the proxy to distribute this technology. That's why that kind of stuff just continues to happen, and, just totally ignore all the crazy conspiracy theorists, people like Kathy O'Brien who have claimed to, be a part of these types of programs, or, authors who have ample evidence to suggest that something is going on, and he calls it monarch because of various reasons. And just the overall use of the butterfly in modern culture as a definite sort of signaling going on in what they are trying to accomplish with society through the control of culture. I just think it's pretty obvious, but again, I'm looking at it through the lens of the gospel message of Jesus Christ and the freedom it brings in that process. And, you can look at this stuff and not be afraid or anything. It's just like, hey, guys, like, tap people on the shoulder, around the world and just be like, hey, I don't know if this, I guess it can help, but be very careful, because this is stuff that really dystopian science fictions are built on, these types of concepts. Oh, it's just an electrode you connect to the forehead. I mean, it's becoming ridiculous, folks. And I'll wrap it up with Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. And if you look at there's a lot of different words translated into mind, but in this case, Proverbs 4:23, your heart is Strong's H3820, and it's leb. Interesting. The word may be related to lobotomy. Not sure about that, actually, but possible. And it could mean inner man, mind, will, heart. And so ultimately, these systems, which again have been explicitly outlined by technocrats in as recent as the 1970s, and even more actually as recent as people like Pragkana in their books, Deus Ex, and others that are coming out now. I mean, it's bombarding everybody now. Nobody is talking about how it is actually controlling parts or segments of society. And the entire entrepreneurial marketing machine, everything corporate, that kind of stuff is precisely that now. It's about how we can control populations, and it's just the way of the world. And it's very much the beast system. And it's been part of the religious institutional infrastructure, and the powers just simply moved to corporate right now. They are the sort of religious leaders, but the rearranging of all of these parts is going to continue on here until it becomes, again, self-evident that much of these prophecies that we look at in the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel come to pass in this modern iteration. Whether, I know some people believe that prophecies were fulfilled in the past, and, they have good arguments for that. And I think there's something to be said there, like, hey, there's a pattern that emerges out of these prophetic visions that can fit. But if the Bible transcends, our carnal understanding of reality, I have no problem thinking that those prophecies that were written at the time they were written have an application in terms of a far fulfillment, not just a near fulfillment. And again, they are patterns. There's nothing new under the sun. So things go a certain way. They just do. It's just the human nature, our fallen sin nature takes us in this direction. And that's part of it as well. So it shouldn't be surprising to anybody. And I think we should stop dividing over nuances of doctrine, because that's not the point here. Especially as these technologies become more invasive, it's going to be more and more like, hey, yeah, we're going to stand over here while you guys go ahead and take the mark. I mean, that's what we're literally talking about. So stuff to keep in mind as these things develop in the world. And again, and other than the end here where I talk about how this relates to a biblical worldview and sort of a spiritual perspective to all of it, much of what I quoted here is documented public information. It's not anything that I'm trying to stretch to make connect. It's just right there, right in the open. And so, red flags, stuff to keep in mind. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.